Okay. This is our last class, and let me see, get this working here. Well, it doesn't want to transition. Wait a minute. Let me restart it. For some reason, it froze up on me. There we go. Okay, so we're at the fourth session here. We looked at how do we relate to God with the spiritual will, and we'll review all this quickly in just a few minutes. But we're looking at session 4. What did John discover from the night? When you're in union with God, what do you discover? And I think we're going to know the answer to this, but he discovers it in a very rich way that I want us to appreciate. We looked at the Cornan spirituality wheel. Remember, we talked about the different functions. You have in the first quadrant is mission-oriented, how we get involved in mission as a spiritual part of our spiritual well-being. We have the cognitive in terms of learning new things. We have the worship, the affective worship, and then we have what we're looking at as quietism, contemplative prayer. It's important to have those moments when we're just quiet, the mind is free, and we are empty. So that's what this whole class has been focusing on. Again, I'll go through these quickly because you guys know all this. Contemplative prayer is our direct, loving, receptive, trusting presence of God. This attention includes the desire to be present through and beyond our images, our thoughts, and our feelings. It is our deepest human home and calling. All other homes and callings derive their authenticity from this. That's from Tilden Edwards. And then we looked at what it is the spiritual journey is trying to do with dark night of the soul. And what we've talked about is that we tend to relate to our world through our senses and through our sensory spirituality, and we have our soul through our spiritual that relates to our world through our intellect, our memory, and our will. And so what John of the Cross is trying to get us to do is to get past these barriers to experience the very essence of God. And so he would say that God is omnipresent out here in creation, but also within us. And so sometimes the only way to experience God within ourselves is to quiet these senses and to quiet this intellect. And we'll be looking at some of this today. Intellect is the capacity to think rationally, to understand and comprehend. And so a lot of times we like to name things, because when you name things, you can control things, right? You say, this is this belongs here, and this is how it should be. And so we kind of organize our world that way. But that gets in the way of experiencing something wholly other, in a sense. And that's where John is pushing the intellect. The will is something else that gets in the way. The will is our ability to make choices, form intentions, and direct actions. We all have our certain will, right, our willpower. But our agenda, our will, can also get in the way. And so St. John, when he's breaking down this dark night, he'll be looking at this part of the spirituality piece. How do we let our will go? How do we let our memory go? In terms of and when he says this, it's our memory of experiences that bring about what we imagine. So from our experiences, we imagine God to be a certain way. God is there to protect me, or God is this image I have of God. And so we base it on past experiences. We live our present life with that image of God based on our experiences, and we determine our future based on that experiences. So we have these predetermined ideas. And so at some point, St. John said we have to let go of that memory. We have to let go of those images and let God be God. Does that make sense? I know we discussed that, but I'm just kind of getting our minds back on class again after you've been out in the week and doing your images and everything. Okay. So the text we had mentioned last week in terms of God at the very center, in terms of experiencing God in our very soul. The Apostle Paul writes in the book of Acts, we talked about this also. Let me just skip down to the very last part. He allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for God and find Him though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in God we live and we move and we have our being. And it's that last sentence there that is very powerful. In him we move, we live, and we have our being. How do we let God guide us? Because one of the goals that St. John is looking for is how do we become awakened to God in our daily activities and let God guide us? Can y'all see okay from there? Yeah, okay. And then Meister Eckhart, a 15th century philosopher and teacher, said, in the soul there is something like a spark of divine nature, a divine light, a ray, an imprinted picture of the divine nature within us. And then Augustine of Hippo, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. And then just to review quickly, so what the boundaries are that we create are our attachments, and I'll flip to these quickly. God, and one of the images we have to work on in terms of letting go, it's not God and me, right? It's just not me and God's my buddy, and God's going to do what I have the agenda for, but rather it's God in me and I in God. And then we had the passage from John 14:18 through 21 that kind of, that brings that home for us. I will not leave you orphaned. I'm coming to you in a little while. The world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I live. You also will live. And on that day you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. And they who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them, and I will reveal myself to them. That's a powerful text that can be applied to what St. John is saying. So St. John is saying that in essence the goal of the spiritual journey is, Lord, don't let my desires blind me to your will. Give me peace with whatever your plan is, right? And so attachments is what we're trying to overcome. That's what we purge. Remember we talked about purging. We talked about illumination last week. And union is the third piece of that puzzle. And that was from Dionysius, I'm pulling a blank here. The brain doesn't do what it used to do, It's sometimes you... Pseudo-Dionysius, which means after, yeah. So it's like a fourth century or so. So he's the one that set up the terms of the spiritual journey in terms of purging what you want to have to let go of, have to burn away. Remember we mentioned the silver spoon last week. Then you have illumination, a new idea. You invite that awareness, that epiphany, and then the goal is union. And that's what we're looking at today, is that sense of union. So what we're purging is our sense of attachments. Remember we talked about that. We're trying to purge our attachments so we can become more aware. And in becoming more aware, by letting go of those things that we attach ourselves to, we become more aware, more free of them. And then with awareness comes attention, right? And what St. John had said is like, this idea of attention is like someone looking for a loved one from a watchtower. You're waiting, you're anticipating. It's like when you go out in nature today, when you're walking back to go to lunch, you're not going back preoccupied about, oh my gosh, I got to get there in 5 minutes, I'm going to get the table. But rather you're taking in what's around you, the people around you. You're seeing them possibly as the people of God, right? These are God's creations. You're smelling the smells, this wonderful food that you'll be taking into your bodies to nourish your body. Before you eat, you take time to pause and say, God, I give you thanks for this food. May it guide me in this day. So it's a whole different way of framing your world, right? When you're in this sense of awareness. It's not that, and believe me, I'm saying all this. I get caught up in the busyness too, and I get caught up in the agenda. So what St. John is saying, the more we practice that sense of prayer and quietness, the more our awareness will become awake in our day-to-day activities, and we begin to see the grace of God around us. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so the goal is awakening each day with an attentive heart, a mind, and a soul that is not always clinging, but rather more open and more vulnerable to God's activity. Without light, so this poem we looked at last week, it says the desire piece in our poem. without light or guide, save that which burned in my heart. That's the desire, right? That's what leads us into the dark night. This light guided me more surely than the light of noonday to the place where he was awaiting me, a place where none appeared, right? And so what we're looking at is that the whole purpose of that openness is a desire for God. That's the only thing that's driving us, is our desire for God, right? Salvation, in contrast to life-denying asceticism that advocates freedom from desire, Teresa and John see authentic transformation as leading us to freedom for desire. So our goal is not of, I'm going to try to be perfect, I'm going to try to be a good boy, and I'm going to try to do everything right, but it's more about, how do I live into this mystery, and how do I discover the love of God? And as we mentioned last week in Thomas Merton's prayer, and I gave you a copy of that, that's a beautiful prayer to start, kind of begin your each day, My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. Can you see the humility in that? And that's what it takes to kind of break some of those walls down, is humility, right? And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so, right? Can you imagine if some of our religious leaders acted that way? It's an openness, it's a vulnerability. I don't know it all, I'm trying to figure it out. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I would put, instead of that word, the desire to love you does in fact bring about that love. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I'll never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you'll lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you'll never leave me to face my perils alone. That's a trusting prayer, isn't it? Yeah, and that's what the dark night of the soul, if we make that part of our life's practice, that's kind of, living each day that way in a sense of openness and trust, especially when our lives are going through changes. Remember I told you why I was doing this class, that first session? Remember I was saying that in my experiences as being here the last 20 years, I have seen some people who have been very faithful all their lives and gone to church and be very active. And sometimes you get near the end of that period, and in some cases, people feel abandoned. They feel like God has forgotten them. They feel useless. They feel like they can't be doing like they used to do, and therefore their life is worthless. Well, if our whole faith has been built on our attachments and our images, of course you feel that way, right? But if you've started this journey of love, then if those things fall away, can we still look for or be attuned to, is God's love here? Is God guiding me now? Is God with me now? And that's an important conversation to have with yourselves. But because it seems like there's a wonderful image of the life journey. It's in the Hindu tradition, and I'm going to mess myself up. I'm doing all a memory here, but it's the student, and the student is one who is learning and gaining knowledge. They can begin their career. Then you have the house dweller. That's the second stage of life, and that's where you're collecting, and you have your house and you have your friends, and you feel very empowered, right? And then after the house dweller, you have the forest dweller. And the forest dweller has to leave the home and go elsewhere, right? So they have to leave that which they've known. And so the forest dweller is at a place of letting go of some of those attachments, right? Beginning to discover something new about themselves that's not based on who they were or what they did or where they lived. That's the forest dweller. And then you have the wanderer. That's the fourth stage. And that's one who comes to a stage of complete openness, of trusting, of kind of being open to a new way of transforming, right? And that's what we're going to look at today. That as we look at, last week we looked at the active, what we can do in terms of letting go of our attachments. Today we're looking at the passive, right? How do we allow God to be our God, right? And to guide us in spite of our images, right? And so we'll be kind of circling back to that. So, as we look at this spirituality wheel, when we first talked about this, you may have been thinking, okay, this is my spiritual journey. This is what we do, right? We have the mission, we have the learning, we have the worship, we have the quietism. But in all honesty, this pulse, this heartbeat of the spiritual journey, it's not about us, but rather it's about God, right? Giving life to creation. So the image I want you to think about, as we think about this pulse, this spiritual journey, it's not seeing our lives all about us, but rather how we interact with our world, how we interact with others, I want you to think organically. How do we live within our world, right? How do we kind of open ourselves to it and allow ourselves to be influenced by it and also influence? How do we let God move through us? You see the two different images here, right? Spiritual journey is not about our personal journey, making it to heaven, right? But spiritual journey is about opening ourselves to the activity, to the love of God, to participate in God's creation. Let me just pause for a minute. Let that just sit. What do you think of that? Where is that hitting you? Before I move on, yeah. Yeah. Oh, you mean just get your mic real fast?
Had 90 years to learn some of this, so.
We never stop learning. We never
You're
stop.
right,
Yeah.
But it made me think of a time in my life when I have been taught by Christian parents from day one. And I came to a point in my life where it was trying to please God with whatever I did. And it was very frustrating, and because you soon realize you don't know if you're pleasing Him or not, or really. Mm-hmm. But the scripture where it says, out of you shall flow streams of living water. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that he was referring to the Holy Spirit, through the Holy Spirit. And at the time I was reading a devotional by Oswald Chamber, and he pointed out there, it says it shall flow. It doesn't say you push it, you pull it, you pump it. It shall flow. Yeah. And that just gave me so much rest from trying to please God and trusting Him. Okay, you have to make it flow.
Exactly.
Flow.
Yeah.
So that's the closest thing I can relate to.
Well, it's right. It's right on target. It's right on target. Yeah, because when that varied word union, it means to allow something to kind of flow in you, to flow through you. Yeah. And I think, you remind me of Martin Luther when you say that, because remember Martin Luther, how he tried the best to please God, and he was flat, beating himself, and trying to live out in the cold, and then he could never be good enough for communion, and then finally he got it, and like you were saying, finally he understood grace. It's about grace, and as we're going to see today, that passiveness, it's exactly what it means. It's not. If you make it about you, it's going to always be active, if you make it about you. Because you want to get to heaven, right? You want to be safe. You want to be accepted. You want to be loved, right? And so it's all about you. And so if we can just let go of that all about me piece and just see ourselves in a bigger creation, a bigger place, then it frees us up. It's about participating in a stream, and just kind of just allow ourselves to be changed. That word transformation, that's to be transformed, right? It's not, which is what St. John's going to push us on. if you have a hard time with this one, this next slide's going to be even harder. That's why I wanted to stop and just before we move on. But what I want you to think about is relationship. How do you relate to God, right? And think about your own relationships. The ones that are most important are the ones that you have had fights with, that you have loved, that you have been committed to. You've gone, but you just love each other, right? And so it's that same sense. How do you become in relationship with God? It's not from being perfect, right? It's not from creating our own images, right? It's having to get in there and really wanting to be in relationship, wanting to be transformed or wanting to be changed. And if you've had a good relationship, relationships change us, don't they? Yeah, the more you're with somebody, the more you kind of talk things through and work things out, you do find yourself being changed. So imagine with God as well. So this next slide, we're talking about relationship, right? So as I point this out, it may get you, it starts out slow, but it's got a little bang at the end here, so I just prepare you for that. Okay, so our image of God is often an image of Alpha and Omega, the omnipotent, the all-knowing, the all-powerful. God is wholly other, transcendent, capable of offering mercy and punishment, right? And this is very much an Old Testament kind of image of God, but it's also revealed in other texts in the Gospel, in the New Testament. Jesus comes along and presents a little different image there. God is more loving. God is vulnerable. He kind of gives a different image for us. Loving connections is based on our obedience and God's mercy. And a lot of times in our churches and our practices, we tend to set up this kind of relationship. You got to be good. You got to do the right things. You got to follow these certain practices, right? That's a tough image, isn't it? God omnipresent and omnipotent, all present and all powerful. God is immersed God, and God runs through us. God wants to be connected to us. Teresa says, in essence, God is willing to be open to us in love with a desire that we love and manifest that love for the world. Yeah. And so in this image, we have a drug dealer. You see a gun there. You see a skull. You see all this awful destruction. And he pulls out his arm to shoot up, and it's the arm of the risen Christ. Yeah. That's a very hard image, isn't it? But where I hear this coming to life is there was a video I was watching last week where a guy his life was it was crashing. I think I mentioned this last week. His life was just in a bad place. He had bad parents. They were drug dealers. He grew up that way. He got involved with drugs. He became a dealer. He got thrown in prison. His life was just going down, right? He had tattoos about hate on his arms. He said, I just hated life. I hated people. I tried to hurt people. He was just in this cycle. And when he was in prison, some guy said, "Why don't you come to a Bible study?" And so he went to the study just to get out of his jail for a while. And while he was there, he felt some kind of presence, a loving presence, just embrace him, right? And that radically changed his life, right? And from that, he gave up drugs right away. And this is not an unusual story. You hear these stories all the time, don't you? But the reason why I'm pointing this story out is, do we believe those stories? Do we believe that God really does enter into people who are struggling? Remember and I think I've told this story too. Remember the lady in Texas in the 1980s who also had a rough childhood and got involved in a motorcycle gang, and she ended up murdering. What happened was her boyfriend and her broke into a house to steal some things, and the man was there. They didn't think he was going to be there, but he was there. A fight broke out, so they got pretty intense, and so she took something and hit the guy over the head and killed him, right? Well, unbeknownst to them, there was somebody hiding under the bed who was the wife of another man. They saw her. Well, she witnessed the murder. What do? They killed her, right? And so at the trial, she makes some weird statement because she's on drugs and stuff. She said, I enjoyed killing them, right? So she was sentenced to death. sentenced to death in Texas. Well, you know how death row works, right? You're there 10 to 14 years sometimes, and that was the case with her. And so while she was in prison, suddenly she felt a presence say to her, "I love you." She just truly felt it, and it changed her life. She started doing Bible studies in the prison. She helped the volunteers who came from the churches. She changed other people's lives. And the sad part of the story is when it came down to her execution 14 years later, the churches came in and said, "Please don't execute her. She's doing so much good for the prisoners. Keep her there for life. We don't care, but she's doing so much good." They ended up executing her, right? Because that was her sentence. Yeah. But my own point is, do we serve this kind of God or do we serve this kind of God? And that's what I want you to think. That's where St. John is how much is God wounded when we are wounded? How much does God suffer when we suffer? How much does God, and it's not to take God's power away. God is still omnipotent. We just don't understand the power of God, right? When I was a chaplain in the hospital, I'd keep going to my supervisor saying, if God's so powerful, why doesn't he just make this a young person, their 20s, they're suffering? Why can't God come in and just make it all better? That's what we're praying for, right? That's what our prayers are for. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. How does that work? So all these awful theodicy questions. And my supervisor kept saying to me, "Steve, you got to believe in the love of God and the presence of God, Sometimes we just don't understand, God's power is beyond our understanding, It doesn't mean we stop having faith. We just have to keep believing this, right? That he's with us. Let me just pause again. But does that make sense? Yeah. And the reason why I'm pushing this is because as we do grow older, there's going to be some things that we begin to question and wonder and why, and this is not the plan I had. So if we start feeling like this is our God, we're going to feel judged, right? We're going to feel condemned. And if we think this is our God, then we know God is with us, right? And those are two big different images right there. Yeah. And so if we're looking at St. John's union with God, we have to trust that we are in union with God, that God will guide us. Yeah. Maybe spend too much time on this, but just let that sit for a little bit, because this trusting has to come from this kind of God. You're not going to lean into this God right here. I am not letting go of my attachments with this God, right? Because I got to be good, right? So it's hard to let go here. With this God, I can let go, no matter where I'm going. I know God's going to be with me. That God understands me. Okay, let me move on here. Can I move on? Okay. So John says the soul arrives at perfect union with God through love. Let that sentence sit in. John says the soul arrives at perfect union with God through love. Yeah, that's the only way you're going to hit that sense of union. You have to trust the love of God. This deepening of love is the real purpose of the dark night of the soul. The dark night helps us become who we are created to be, lovers of God and of one another. And when you think of that, what does that sound like to you? This last sentence. The dark night helps us become who we are created to be, lovers of God and one another. Where have you heard that before? Gosh, you're not going to play with me, are you? Exactly. That's the commandment, isn't it? You should love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and and you love your neighbor as yourself. And let me just read John 15 to you. And I'm discovering this more and more. I can't love others unless I let God love me, right? Because otherwise my love is based on, I don't want to say manipulation, but it's based on need or what I need. It's a different kind of love when I'm loving based on myself. When I'm being kind to somebody who I don't want to be kind to, it's a different kind of love. But when you let the love of God kind of guide your day, it flow, like you were saying, Ms. Schneider, it's a different kind of flowing. It's not coming from you. It's coming from your openness to God. And let me read 15 here real fast, because John does a good job at this. The Gospel of John. 15:9. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Yeah. And so John says, in essence, the soul is kind of like a stone buried in the sand. The more we leave it there and things rush against it, the deeper it sinks into the sand. Our relationship with God is dynamic. It's always capable of greater and greater deepening. And so as I say that, it's not like we're going to go from purging to illumination and union and we're all fixed, but rather it kind of cycles. It's a cycle, and it's one that the more you touch or you be touched, the more you come back around again with a desire, and you're touched once again, and you're touched again, and you're touched again, and you go attachments again, you get purged, and it's that whole back and forth. That's part of that journey. An image I love to use during that is the salt doll. Remember the story of the salt doll, the doll of salt, in terms of union. And this is a story of a doll of salt that was looking for the answers to the world, right? And so this doll of salt journeys through the wilderness and the deserts and just can't seem to find what the meaning of life is or its source. And it finally comes to the edge of the ocean, right? And there's this big body of water, and everything else this doll of salt has been on has been very concrete and stable and steady. That's what he's been walking on. But now he's got this body of water out there that's just moving and waves and just looks very unnerving in some ways. But yet there's something about that ocean that calls this salt doll to investigate. And why is that? If you look at the story, what's a doll of salt made of? Made of salt, right? And what's in the ocean, right? Salt and water. So that's whatever's in this doll of salt, he's picking up from this ocean. And so he says, "Who are you?" You guys have heard that, right? "Who are you?" And the ocean comes back and says, "Well, if you want to know who I am, you're going to have to touch me," right? And that's that perfect image of St. John of the Cross. We have to be open to experience who this God is. And so, I'll kind of summarize here. So what do you think? The salt doll touches the ocean. And and so the ocean comes up, and it takes away the salt doll's foot, right? And he's like, I just lost a part of myself. My image, my attachment says, look at that. And the doll of salt's very angry at first. And he says, "But who are you?" And the ocean says, "If you want to know me, you have to come further," right? And so you have this dialogue taking place where the salt doll eventually comes into the ocean all the way. And I think that's a good spiritual image of our journey, right? We start this life as that Hindu 4 stages. As a student, we learn stuff about ourselves. We become very self-centered when we're younger, right? It was all about me. And then in the household where we got our attachments. And then, but then as we wander, we begin to let go of our all about me, right? We begin to trust our Creator and allow the Creator to move within us, to work through us. Yeah. So that's kind of the union we get in the sense of this last stage. Yeah, Jane, can you use the microphone?
There's this little song that I'm remembering. I think it's from the Baha'i writings, but it says, "O God, make me a hollow reed through which thy flow by thy love may flow to others."
Yeah,
You're asking to, is that,
yeah.
you know where that's from? "Oh God, make me a hollow reed
Yeah, I can't pull it up right. I mean, it could be one of the prophets or Jeremiah. I don't know. I don't remember it.
through which thy love may flow to others."
Yeah,
And we have a
yeah.
song that we sing it to.
Yeah,
So
I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about, Gene.
that's, so
That's
you
that
just
image. Yeah,
get rid of all that.
yeah. But yeah. So just let that sit. I mean, it's a radical concept. Could you imagine living that way? Yeah. Just to pause for a moment and think about what it would be like to have that sense of freedom, you know, that my life is more than just about me. You know, God is, you know, I'm allowing God to work through me. Do you want to say something, Joanne? No, you just have the hot potato, huh? Oh, okay. All right. So we talked about active. I better. Yeah, you're a hollow reed. Okay. So we talked about active last week. This week it's passive, right? We're letting God, as we mentioned earlier, flow through us. Dark night is a flowing of God into the soul, which purges it from its ignorance and imperfections, habitual and natural and spiritual. Here, God teaches the soul and instructs us in the perfection of love. That's what I was saying earlier. If I try to love somebody without feeling the love of God, then it's all about me and how I've cared for somebody else, or how I received somebody else's care, and I have to give back now because now somebody gave me this and I got to go help them. You know, it's all about me, right? Whereas if it becomes a perfection of love, you can be more open to grace, to receiving, and also giving. You know, another thing I discovered in healthcare, don't you love these healthcare illustrations, is, you know, I hate receiving care from somebody else. You know, I don't want somebody to care for me. I'm used to doing everything on my own, right? And so it's very humbling to have to depend on somebody else. But if you think about the grace of that, right, for some, you know, if you just let yourself receive, you're not fighting it so much, right? But you're letting whatever happens, and giving, you know, and if the person, and sometimes people aren't very good at giving, sometimes they're hard on you and sometimes they're not. And so your gracefulness helps that, I think, somewhat. Your sense of gratitude, your sense of direction, or if you have a certain need you need to make known. But if you're fighting it, it's just a different dynamic taking place there. So that's that allowing the love of God to flow through in the day or in the life. And I'm talking now. You put me in that situation, I'm going to fight it, right? But I'm going to hopefully remember this, so I can try to live it. That's where Job says, and this in terms of the reason why it's called dark night is because the height of divine wisdom, which transcends the knowledge of the soul, and in this way it obscures our own wisdom. That's why it's called the dark night. What we don't know, we know very little about God. We know very little about how God works, and the more we open ourselves to God and God's love, the more those things that we have learned make sense. Like some of the scripture texts will begin to come to life or come alive, like the John text. As Job found out in his text we read last week, I've heard of you in the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. So inasmuch as God purges the soul according to the substance of its senses and spirit, and according to the interior and exterior faculties, the soul must need be in all its parts reduced to a state of emptiness, poverty, abandonment, and must be left dry or arid and empty in the darkness. That's how you're transformed, right? It has to let go of those things so God can filter through. And so the dawning of this energy, remember we talked about these are the boundaries? And so the whole goal of the dark night is to loosen these up. I mean, they're never going to go away, right? They're always going to be there. But you're hoping to loosen them up enough that we may experience the love of God, right? That's what you're hoping to do, is just in that moment of quiet, of letting go of our attachments, just to have one moment where you feel that awesome power of God and that loving embrace of God that helps frame everything else. You know, that's all we're hoping for. And God's always there. We're just the ones that tend to block it. Yeah. So energy of desire is liberated from attachments that have kept one restrained. Meditation to contemplation and prayer, soul has moved from the autonomous self-determination to self-giving will to be led. That's not about me, it's about God, right? Here, actions and feelings flow from a bottomless source within us. That's that river we're talking about, or that reed. It's unending, right? And our intellect can do nothing but stand by and marvel, right? Awakening of self, dawning of our essential union with God and all creation. John says the intellect, in essence, when we come into a state like this, that becomes our faith, right? It's not, I have a good friend that just loves to read, and read about everything, which is good. He's got a lot of knowledge. But at some point, he's going to have to trust. He's going to have to start to live his faith. And so this is where the intellect is, you're going to have to loosen up sometimes to let that be your faith. You know, we're never going to learn about, I can teach classes every week, and we're never going to learn everything about God. We can learn about our history, how we got where we are, how we got our certain doctrines, what books say certain things about, and we can learn activities about Jesus and characters. But we have to, at some point, allow ourselves to experience the love of God, right? And that would lead to faith. Memories become hope when we allow these walls to come filtered in. And when I say that, memories are not based on our images, on what we've grown up believing who God is, but rather our memories are based on hope. We know because we've experienced that love that there is hope, right? We are connected. We're part of that river. We're part of that reed. And nothing will take that away. That's why Paul says, whether we live or whether we die, we're always the Lord's possession, right? No matter what we go through, we're still connected to that river. And will becomes love, right? So my will becomes love. And so that's when that kind of breaking through. Now again, let me make the point. You don't break through and we live this way the rest of our lives. You know, it's that cycle thing. We just have that moment where these things suddenly become revealed, right? And that influences us maybe a little more the next time to try to be more open as we go through our day. These experiences are often fleeting, but they let us know why we're here and the reason for our being. They also empower that deep yes within us, the desire that is our hope, our prayer, and our meaning. Are you with me still? Okay. Now I'm gonna kind of move kind of quickly through this, but so John, in order to convey this idea, he uses certain symbols, and they're going to be in our poem. And so the symbol he's going to use is is a secret ladder we go up to experience this union. And on this ladder, in order to go through this ladder, we wear certain garments. It's much like Paul saying the armor of faith, or we have the armor of faith on us that kind of leads us through life. Well, John has his own symbolism. These are only symbols of experiences as I go through them, okay? So I'll go through them. So we're looking at this part of the poem. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder disguised. So we're looking at these three things. Oh, happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. And that's your attachments, right? That's where we're leaving our house of all the things we attach ourselves to. And so the secret ladder is secret because it transcends every sense and once makes all harmony of the outward and inward sense to cease to be and be dumb. So they kind of take those things away. The latter are the steps of love by which the soul is lifted up to God and is humbled. And I'm going to skip to the next slide to kind of go through these steps, and I'll come back to this other one. It reminds me, and it's secret because the theology is, because it's infused through love, this happens secretly, and in the darkness, it has to be hidden from the work of our own faculties. Otherwise, we'd be trying to explain what this is, right? And that's the funny thing about meditation and contemplation. Once you're contemplating, once you're open to God and just experiencing, The minute you try to say, oh, now what is this and where do I fit this in, it's gone, right? And so it's one of just being open for a minute and just receiving, and not trying to use our faculties to explain it, because the wisdom of God is beyond our explanation. It's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, I only know in part, but then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is, love. Yeah, boy, you guys know your text. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's because love is transforming. Love changes us. Faith will not change. Faith kind of gets us to continue to be committed. But love has to inform faith and inform hope, and that's what St. John is kind of pushing us on here. The latter allows us to raise up to God and be humbled to self, exaltation. So he looks at the different ladders here, and I'll come back to this other slide. There's 10 steps he goes through. Don't try to memorize this, but with each step, one is becoming more and more available to God, right? The first step, the soul languishes, like Psalm 63, O God, Thou art God, I seek Thee, my soul thirsts for Thee, my flesh faints for Thee, as in a dry and weary land where no water is. And that dry and weary land is my attachments. They have no meaning. I see how vain they are, so they dry up, right? That's part of that stepping towards God. Soul seeks without ceasing. I seek your every face, God. I seek you in all things. It's that. So you're really searching for God to try to be in You want to be in relationship with God, right? You see that potential. The soul strives with fervor. One labors to climb, and he mentions here is that it is a labor. It is sometimes you feel like you're getting nowhere, and sometimes you feel like you're getting close, but then you're not, and God's not being who you imagine God to be. And so he lifts up that struggle. And soul finds strength eventually in its desire for God, that God doesn't let us struggle forever in this journey. Again, don't memorize this. What I want you to get a feel for is, how do we let go? How do we let go, and how do we tend to trust and let God's love begin to flow in us? And that's those steps. Soul becomes impatient to be in union with God. I want God to be here now. God's grace carries one up further. That's that Isaiah passage. You may recognize it. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. With that, the soul is emboldened to keep on climbing. And so the image we have here is, if you just start being quiet once in a while, maybe you'll try it again, and you get a sense of something, and so you try it again. And so it kind of emboldens us to keep searching. Yeah. The soul is able to touch God, right? You're close enough that you feel in union with God. The soul burns with sweetness. That's that sense that we finally experience the love of God that is changing or transforming. And then the soul feels in union with God. And then Matthew 5:8 is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And remember we said, where does desire come from? It comes from, and the image we have is the heart. The organ doesn't work that way, but it's the heart's desire that kind of draws us to God, and it's the heart's desire that will see God. That's how we see that. And then disguise. Oh, should I go work? Okay, I'm going to work through all those again. So disguise is what oneself puts on to cover one's. Well, this is St. John's language here. He's saying we put these robes on to help climb the ladder. And remember, he lives in the 15th century. So in the 15th century, there's a lot of language about the devil or Satan, and trying to keep us from being in union with God. And so St. John sees these garbs as ways to help us go in disguise up the ladder to be open to God. If you want to look at this psychologically or emotionally, it's putting these garments on helps us to reframe things in order to let ourselves become more trusting, if you want to see it that way. I mean, there's different ways you can look at it, but these garments serve a purpose to help us let go of our attachments, our own desires. And so here's the garment. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay. I know I get a lot of glassy eyes and falling asleep now. I'm not sure. I know. Just, yeah. You could say, what a day it's been, huh? Yeah, okay. So the first garment that he goes on to is the white robe. And the white robe is the white robe of faith. And faith helps us to go forth in the dark with confidence through brightness of faith. And the devil can't see, and that's why I use the color white. But faith, for you to desire God, what does that take? You got to have faith that God is loving, right? You got to have faith that God created you. Otherwise, you'd say, this is a bunch of malarkey. I'm going to do it my way. I know God's there, but I'm not sure about God. I'm going to just kind of do things my way, the things I know, right? And so it takes faith to say, I'm going to start looking for God. I'm going to start desiring God because I know God loves me and God wants to be known. That's our whole Old Testament story, right? When the people leave Exodus, that God wants to be known, right? And so how do we take time to know God? Okay, the next one is this is St. John's imagery, but again, just think about symbolically what he's trying to say. The second robe that you use, or the second robe, what he says is you put the white robe on first, the robe of faith. And over the robe of faith, you put the robe of hope, right? So faith gets us on the ladder to move up. We have to have faith that God loves us. Once you're on the ladder, it's hope that keeps us going, right? Protected from the enemy of the world, green color of living hope. Desires of the world seem arid and dry. I can't go back to what I went to before, right? I can't go back to believing that life is all about me, right? I know it's not about me. I can't go back to believing that God's going to protect me from all things because I know bad things happen to good people. You just go into the hospital, you'll see that, right? So I have to keep hoping. I have to keep hoping that God is there and I will learn, right? It seems dry and empty, the desires for eternal life. That's why it's green, right? You're wanting to be part of that river or part of that reed. It doesn't mean we are living forever and ever, but the love of God is shining through us forever and ever. The senses we see within an eternal frame looking upward. And an example that Gerald May uses, and we can, you may hear this on Palm Sunday also. If you look at Ukraine right now, what gives people the sense to go out and play music after a town's been destroyed? Why would they do that, right? And that's that sense of hope, right? In the midst of just devastation, right? They bring music to the community to say, don't give up, right? We're not sure what the outcome's going to be, but we're going to keep on hoping, and we have faith. And so you have faith and hope. Hope is overlaid with faith, that God is active. And so if you looked in the news and people who played music, they'll say to you, I had to give something back, right? There's so much destruction around me. I had to reach out and give people hope, right? To give people hope, to keep on living, right? To keep on with life. And so the sense with the ladder, just to kind of stretch it a little bit this way, is the ladder, what keeps us on the ladder of looking for God is that hope that God is active, that God is present, that'll lead us to the next rung of trusting. I'll work that out better later on Palm Sunday, but it's that sense of why do we hope and what do we hope in, and then the last robe is purple, and it is the robe of charity, and that's when you're up near the top of the ladder, which is the robe of love, and causes greater love of the beloved, true love of God and for God's sake, and love of others for God's sake. For where there is true love of God, there enters neither love of self nor that of the things of the self, but seeks worth in the virtues of God. This is purple, which is spoken of in the Song of Songs, because it's the love of God in which God reclines on the purple. So it's that sense of Um, Faith gets us on the ladder. Hope keeps us moving upwards. And once you get to the top, that's when you experience a sense of love and charity. That's that flowing. It's that flowing sense from the reed that we become. At that point, we strive to become participants. Oh shoot! It's 5 till. Okay. It's a 2-hour session today. No, I'm going to quit. Yeah. Okay, so getting back to your point, O night that guided me, O night more lovely than dawn, O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed in the beloved, upon my flowery breast, kept holy for himself. This is like a Harlequin novel, isn't it? But what I want you to pick up on is the vulnerability. This is all about vulnerability, both of the one who is praying and of God, right? It's that openness. I remain lost in oblivion, my face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. And so I just want you to focus on that, just that vulnerableness of both the prayer and of the Creator, right? In relationship. It doesn't take away the power of God. It doesn't take away the knowledge of God. God is still God. It's just God allows God to be present with us, right? To change us. To change the way we view people, to change the way we act, to change the way we live in our world. True love is like some infinite way of being that we become part of, flowing energy of willingness, an eternal yes, resounding with every heartbeat, and contemplative hope and transformed hope is also completely open and free. It is not hope for peace or justice or healing. That also would be an attachment. It is just hope, a bare hope and energy of hope and open expectancy. I think justice and healing come out of it, but we're not hoping for a certain outcome. We're just participating with God and believing that God will lead us where we need to go, right? Does that make sense? Because sometimes we can look at the world and say, why is Ukraine being bombed right now? That poor city near the coast is just flattened. And so if we had hoped they wouldn't have bombed it, we'd be feeling bad right now, thinking, well, gosh, I was hoping for them not to bomb that city, and look at it now, right? And so it's a hope not just for peace and not just for peace and justice, but also a hope, a bare hope of energy, of open expectancy. God will work through this somehow. And if I open myself to God, God will let me know what I need to do. Okay, I'm going to end with that. One last poem I want to share with you. I love it. It's a Book of Hours, Love Poems to God. It's from Marie Wilkie. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know, am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? Let that sit. I read that at a director's meeting one time, and I won't tell you who said this, but he said, "What?" But let it sit. Let it sit. It's a powerful poem. Do we have 1 minute for 2-minute prayer? We're going to end with this 2-minute prayer, okay? So let's just, a lot of information, just let it go. Let it go. Don't try to figure it out. Just settle into your seat. Yeah. Let your breath, just let yourself relax in your chair. And let your breath be a way of, when you breathe in, just imagine the Spirit of God breathing in you. And then as you exhale, just let yourself just rest into the arms of God. And then I want to give you this phrase as you're breathing. Yeah, let your breath, as you breathe, receive the Spirit. Let your exhale just say, I love you, God. I love you, God. And so just breathe this for a moment, just for 1.5 minutes. I love you, God. Amen. Okay, that concludes the class. If you need to talk afterwards or have any questions, I'm available. Although I'm going on vacation for a week after this. I planned that pretty good, didn't I? Hey, Rick, thanks for all your help, man.